That public square is the room right next door here, so feel free to drop in there and say hello to Barb, get your book signed. I know she would love to meet you in there. We are going to turn from the broader idea of disinformation to one of the newest things going on in the world of information here in the state of California and across the world. And I'm going to invite our next panel to come on up. As they do, I want to tell you about our new technology reporter, new as of a few months ago, Khari Johnson. Khari came to us from Wired Magazine. He has done a lot of research and writing on technology, information, and what he's curated for this event today is a conversation about California's role in artificial intelligence. Not just the little things like, is artificial intelligence going to take over the world and drive us crazy? We all had that conversation. He's really thinking about the role of the state of California in holding AI accountable, right? The legislative, the policy, and not just California, Washington, Brussels, the world. So I'm going to invite Khari and his panel to come on up, and we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. All right.
Hi. Good afternoon. First question for the audience. How many people here are excited about the positive ways AI can change human lives? Can I get a show of hands? Yeah? Okay. And then how many people here are concerned that AI can harm you, your family, your community, and society? What's remarkable is it's usually about even. I was at a conference last week for Code for America in Oakland, and it was roughly even there as well. I've covered AI for the better part of the past decade, and it can do a lot of things that seemed impossible at one time and do things for the betterment of humanity, but it can also concentrate power. It can take away people's agency and rights, and these kinds of risks are often highest for the most vulnerable among us. So let's get into unpacking what California, an epicenter of AI innovation and regulation, is, with 5 people who are each taking unique approaches to shaping regulation. Ashkan Soltani is Executive Director of the California Privacy Protection Agency. That agency is considering rules for automated decision-making tools used by businesses. Try to get the pronunciation right on this. Gerard de Graff is the EU Tech Envoy to the United States and Director of the San Francisco office. Samantha Gordon is Chief Program Officer at TechEquity and a former union organizer. Amy Tong is Secretary of the Government Operations Agency for the state of California. She oversees 22,000 state employees. The GOA set up rules for state agencies must follow before signing generative AI contracts. And Steve Padilla is a state senator representing a district from San Diego, my hometown. This is the only microphone I have. Am I standing here? I guess so. I have a mic on, so when I walk away.
They'll get you.
Okay. Clever. That's good. Can you hear me? You can hear me? Okay. To the panelists, please speak up when you feel inspired to do so, but try and keep your responses to 90 seconds since we have a very large group here. I thought we'd start with just sort of a general good table stakes question that helps people understand, the imperatives here. Why do you think it's imperative to take action now on regulating AI, and what do you believe is at stake? Any immediate?
Are we going orders? Or?
Certainly for the first one. I suppose we could start with Ashkan or...
Test. All right. Well, as probably the one guy who's not as tech savvy as these folks, who studied law and public policy instead, and has a role to play in what the regulatory framework, if any, could look like in the largest state. There's a lot at stake. If we think the advent of the World Wide Web and internet and the digital age was quick, perceptibly, the advent and the deployment, which is already here, of generative AI is already well ahead of where this conversation is. And so given both the opportunities I think in many of our view to enhance production and workforce and standards and safety and provide all of the good potential this has, I think we know enough that there are issues largely unaddressed in the regulatory framework about safety and integrity and privacy and unintended consequences. And my humble opinion, we are already a little bit behind the curve, and there's a lot to do and a lot at stake.
I guess I'll jump right in. As Khari, you had mentioned it in your introductory, and then the senator have alluded to, that we know the not just AI, but especially generative AI is really coming to us fast and furious. Whether we like it or not, it's happening, right? And I think it's important for us to take a proactive stand to make sure that as much as we can catch up on the evolution that we are. The governor issued an executive order last year, tasked the government operations agency to work with the various state entities in the state to figure out what this really means. And out of the 7 items, I'll point out 3 specific big buckets that we feel is very, very important. One is, as you mentioned, the impact to the vulnerable community. Because state here is to provide state services to the community, and we know that without the input from our community, who are the recipients of these services, then we're not doing our work. And in fact, that's why our state chief equity officer, Pam Chu, is also in the audience listening to this conversation. 2, we want to make sure that as much as there's a lot of conversation about the security, the privacy, and all that, which I know Ashkan is going to talk more about that, we want to focus on the workforce development. And that is, it's both for the existing workforce, which we, in consultation with our labor partners, as well as academia curriculum development for students that are coming up, to school, like what type of future skill set that needs to be taken into consideration. And then last but not least, that in all of this, while we continue to work with our legislative partners on the regulatory framework, something that the state, of California are really, really honing on to that is our procurement guideline. Because given the purchasing power of the state of California, we feel like that is also something that we could actually play an influential role in helping to set some expectation in the industry as well.
Secretary Tong, I know that the GOA has plans to release a report next month on AI's impact on vulnerable communities. Can you share any details about that?
Yeah, I don't want to give too much away because that way I'm just giving you the cliff note of what to read. But yes, in the July-August timeframe, and in fact that's why Pam Chu here is leading that effort, we really wanted to provide guidelines as well as a risk assessment recommendation. And in fact, TechNet is one of our partners in engaging the community to provide us feedback on what would helpful to the state entity, and there's 150 of us in the state entity, when they are determining whether AI actually serve a role in their service delivery. Let's be very diligent about it up front. Right? Like we do not want to encourage anybody just automatically say, let's just use AI to solve our problem without actually thinking it through. What does it really mean? What does it really impact to our community? What does it mean that if there's a risk, how do we mitigate it? So there's that level of a guideline for determination, if you would. And then as we go through the testing, what is the involvement with our vulnerable community so that they have a say into whether these are beneficial or not beneficial, harmful to the degree of the delivery. And then before anything gets deployed, you want to have another check and balance in place to make sure this is really what we want. So I think that is what the guideline, and they're very specialized to the specific vulnerable community. I'll take that as a cue. I should hand it to somebody else for the next question.
Samantha, Gerard, Ashkan, any other thoughts on why it's imperative to take action now to regulate AI?
Well, the European Union has already is the first group of democratic countries in the world that have regulated on AI. So action taken now. We've actually taken action in the past. We started already 2017, 2018 to prepare this. So it's also not action in the way like, well, let's rush something through and then see what happens. I want to say that the EU is not AI phobic. We not regulate, which is often, of course, the caricature of the EU, something that moves and the EU regulates and then kills innovation. We probably will be talking about that a little bit later. We see huge opportunities with AI for better service delivery, for medical breakthroughs, for smart energy systems. So the EU is fully committed to AI, but there are risks. Like with every technology, that's not different. There's maybe a difference, I think as Senator Padilla said, the speed, the disruptive effect of AI, and these risks, I mean, that's what public policy is all about, need to be mitigated. And if you look at surveys, I think you asked a question to the room here before we stepped on stage, like, well, what do you think about AI? Well, you do look at surveys around the world. Actually, I mean, 50% on average of people say, well, I'm not absolutely sure about AI. I'm a bit apprehensive about it. I'm not sure that I trust it. In this country, more people are apprehensive about it than in the European Union, surprisingly. So to build this trust, to make sure that people can actually kind of convincingly embrace AI, they know it's going to be fair, they know it's going to be non-discriminatory, they know it's going to be safe and trustworthy, is important also for the market. No market is going to grow when half of your potential customers say, I am not sure that I actually want to be, I'm not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So we think that's good for the market. And if you do it in, as I mentioned the word risk, the European Union is regulating AI, but we don't regulate AI just kind of erga omnes in kind of all its kind of complexity. We regulate AI in a particular use context where there is risk. And we have already cases, I think Senator Padilla already referred to this. I mean, the country that I know best, which is the Netherlands, where I'm from, massive scandal a couple of years ago where AI was used for social benefits and 30,000 people were unfairly identified as effectively fraudsters and were prosecuted. I mean, this was about children's benefit, children allowances. Kids were taken away from the parents. Some parents committed suicide. And the government almost fell about it 2-3 years ago. So this is not something that a problem that like, okay, we can think about and sometime in the future we need to come to grips with it. It's a problem that is here and now. Maybe 5 or 10% of all AI. So again, 90% we don't have to worry about. But these are the kind of things you need to address in a public policy way. And then you have these very powerful models where even the ones that have developed them are saying, oh, I'm really kind of concerned about what these models are capable of. And that's the other thing we need to look at, that these powerful models are not ending up in the hands of bad actors and then used for massive disinformation campaigns or cybersecurity attacks or even worse.
I was curious, if you could answer briefly, your office told me you visited Sacramento this year more than any other city, including Washington, D.C., and I was curious why that is the case.
Well, I visit Sacramento probably about once a week, at least 2-3 times a month. I mean, it's not been as hot this year as it is today. So, I mean, I prefer San Francisco over Sacramento, at least today. But it is because there's very interesting and important work being done by the legislature. I mean, you know that the U.S. Congress, there's a lot of discussion around AI, but not much action. I mean, we don't need to go into that. But California is taking, I think, a very serious and thoughtful approach to AI. There's a lot of discussions. There's bills that are on the table for discussion, and it makes sense to work together and to learn from each other. So we've been interacting, particularly with the sponsors, the ones that have been introducing these bills, the chairs of some of the committees. I've testified also before the Assembly together with other experts, and so there's a fruitful, constructive discussion going on between the EU and the state of California. I mean, you have the California effect in the US. We have the Brussels effect globally. I mean, if the California effect can meet the Brussels effect, we can set the standard for the world. Democratic kind of governance, I mean, we can set the standard for the world. And that would be a positive thing. And also from an industry perspective, the market will be global. And so if the rules are at least aligned, if not convergent, that would be a positive thing. So that's what we are trying to work towards.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm here quite frequently.
Yeah. Samantha, can you talk a bit about how and why you made the switch from union organizing to AI policy, and about the AI working group that you helped create?
I was tired. I had a 1-year-old. I was very tired, so I thought, why not study the tech industry? That's honestly, I was tired. Union organizing is extremely exhausting. I was at SEIU for 13 years, doing work I really, really believed in, and the connection for me was really looking at what was happening in the economy, what was happening in California, and seeing in the workplace the growing role of technology, not often as a benefit to workers, but something that was put upon workers that furthered inequities that already existed. And so really thinking about how could we change that? How could we make it so that these technologies that have a lot of promise are truly beneficial to workers, are truly beneficial to our communities. And so I spent the last 4 years really studying technology, studying the tech industry, thinking about how do we interrupt those systems, how do we bring an economic lens to the tech industry's products and practices, and think about how they can be beneficial for everyone. And through that, to answer your earlier questions about why it needs to be regulated, I've seen this as a labor organizer for a long time. AI is not new. You said you've been reporting on it for 10 years. I think the ways in which people conceptualize of it in this moment, generative AI, large language models, that is a new iteration of machine learning, but automated decision-making systems, more sort of legacy forms of AI, they have been in place and have been impacting people for over a decade, and we've learned a lot. The example that Gerard just shared from the Netherlands, it's not unique to the Netherlands. Here in California, 600,000 people were wrongfully denied unemployment insurance as a result of an algorithm, and that incorrectly tagged them as UI fraud during the pandemic. In Pennsylvania, there has been a lot of ink spilled about the Allegheny Family Screening Tool, which determines your likelihood to be neglectful towards your child and can determine whether or not your child gets taken away without evidence underneath it. In LA, there is a system that ranks whether or not you should get access to housing if you're homeless that disproportionately favors white applicants. There are a number of these sort of documented situations. And so I think that's the case for regulating it, is that this is not a novel technology. We want to Gerard's point, I just could not echo that more. We at TechEquity, we are very pro-tech, we are very pro-innovation, and we believe firmly that in order for technology to be beneficial, in order for there to be innovation, people have to trust the products. They have to trust that they're not going to exploit them, because all the stories we hear now are those of exploitation. So what would it look like for workers to be in the room when we decide whether or not AI is the right tool for this benefit that we want to administer better to the public, and then help us spec out, like, what would those RFPs include? What could be included in the technology? What would it look like for communities to come in and say, like, here's what it would really mean for my family to have better access to services, and here's what would make it easier for me to engage. So that's our goal, is how do we really put people at the center of this technology so that it can fully fulfill its promise and that we can have true innovation.
Yeah, thank you. Ashkan, you've been on the road lately for public listening sessions for the automated decision-making rules that the CPPA is drafting. A few months ago in the meeting, you were saying that you felt like the majority of the feedback that you had received thus far was from industry. Are you learning anything or have any major takeaways from listening to the public in these initial listening sessions?
Certainly. I mean, I think for folks that don't know, California was the first state to pass a privacy law. We were, we are also the first state to have an independent agency, and we're tasked with issuing regulations on automated decision making. And while that may not be all of AI, we like to think of it as the AI that impacts people, the AI that makes significant decisions that impact people's lives. And we have been on this listening tour. We've had multiple hearings across California. We've had a number of engagement from stakeholders, business community, largely, but also the kind of labor organizations, creative agencies, creative organizations, and activists and civil rights folks. And we are learning, kind of to the earlier point about the survey, that people really care about this issue, because I think, as everyone said, it has the potential to have huge upsides, but it has the potential to really impact individuals' lives, right? And so I like to say, there's no AI without PI, without personal information, and our agency kind of oversees kind of the use of personal information by businesses. And to develop AI, you kind of need three key elements, right? You need essentially expertise, which I think Senator Padilla is doing some great work there. You need essentially compute, which primarily currently lives with very large companies, and then you need data. You need a lot of that data is personal information. Some of it is also IP. It's proprietary, protected information, intellectual property, but I think we have here, by and large, that people whose data is being used to train AI or whose data is being used to make decisions about them have real concerns about how that information are used. And I think rightfully so, because there currently isn't any guardrails. California being, the 5th largest economy, home to, I learned today, home to more of the Fortune 500 than any other state, home to a lot of the companies that are creating this technology, has a huge opportunity, has a huge ability to help shape and put guardrails in place so that these kind of technologies, these resources are really effective and trustworthy and safe. And I think that has the potential to transform not only California, but to Gerard's point, the kind of the world between the California effect, the Brussels effect. California was the first state to have privacy in its constitution. I don't know if folks know that, since 1977, we were the first state. And I think it's a huge opportunity for us as a kind of industry leader, as a state, to really drive how to build these technologies in a safe and effective way so that they don't simply do what typically machine learning do, which is reinforce existing biases, existing problems with data, with existing social issues. They just get amplified, right? People call AI stochastic parrots, right? They just simply take data and they kind of regurgitate it. And we want to just make sure that when it's done in ways that affect people's lives, that it's done with proper oversight, with proper safeguards, and proper participation.
And how would these draft rules make a difference? And it would be for consumers,
That's
workers, and students.
That's right. So our agency administers the California Consumer Privacy Act, which gives consumers already a baseline protection to access, delete, and correct their personal information. It also requires businesses to use only data that's reasonably necessary and proportionate to achieve what they're doing. So that's already in the law. That's already protections consumers have in California. We've issued regulations, and we're overseeing and enforcing that. These new rules that are currently in draft form, but we hope to soon move to formal rulemaking. And we've been working on this similar to what Gerard said. We've been working on this since even before I was appointed at the agency. The board, we're governed by a 5-member board. The board started working on this issue since 2021, September 2021, before the kind of the generative AI hype, but also, to earlier points, when a lot of these technologies were kind of being used in ways that actually impact people. So these new draft regulations currently will provide consumers the ability to, one, receive meaningful information about automated decision making, and then as well as kind of opt out of those decisions. And there are some caveats where when human participation is involved, and there's other kind of necessity carve-outs, but largely they give consumers some control over the use of this technology. They also provide 2 other key important facts. One is kind of, we heard about risk assessments in the security sense. Our regulations require businesses that deploy these technologies to undertake risk assessments to ensure that they're safe, that they balance the equities involved, that they don't kind of perpetuate biases that already exist. So those risk assessments are critical. And then lastly, the current draft regulations propose that consumers also have the right to opt out their data out of the training of AI. So if you don't want your information to be used in models, those are currently an option for consumers. And we know in many instances, again, with respect to how equity is provided, there are key kind of interests involved in how our information are used, particularly if we're not receiving the benefits from it. So those are kind of currently in draft form. We're hoping to move forward with those this summer, and we work very closely with our counterparts, and we try to work closely, even though we're an independent agency. We want to make sure that we're harmonized with a lot of the actors in this space, because I think, again, it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I know there's a lot happening this summer. I know, that the Vulnerable Communities Report is due out soon. The legislative session should end soon, and that, Senator Padilla, can you talk a bit about SB 892 and, why risk assessments are part of that? Do you feel like we need a different approach to contracts in the age of AI?
I appreciate that. Actually, a couple of bills, 892 and 893, plug. You're shocked that a politician would plug his bill package. Look, first I want to acknowledge the leadership of the governor and the administration, certainly on the EO side, and certainly on the framework that sort of seeks to provide a balance to capitalize on the best assets and global leadership position that California has on the innovation side, and kind of follow the Hippocratic oath there to not do damage, certainly, to those evolutions and efforts. At the same time, legislation is needed, and it's needed because executive orders, as many of you know, don't always have the force of law, and they don't have the permanency of statute. And governors change, and principal members of the cabinet change, and personnel change. And I think that this particular type of effort needs to be solidified in law if it's the right framework. So 892, you think about this, okay, first of all, it's here. It's deployed. It's in many industries, in public health, in the healthcare delivery system, certainly in the financial system. I mean, right now, automated decision-making systems are making lending decisions for many folks, and so it is here. The question is, okay, if you're the state of California and you're kind of big, what is an appropriate, impactful place to begin? So SB 892 seeks to capitalize on the purchasing power and the market size of California, and basically would require the Department of Technology to establish a set of protocols and standards for procurement that are specific to the unique dynamics and attributes of generative AI, and to think about assessment standards and protocols, risk mitigation protocols, adverse incident, that's a fancy tech way of saying when bad stuff happens, that affect the people that the state particularly is charged with protecting. How do we mitigate that? How do we identify that? How do we respond to that? And to require that's part of the Office of Administrative Laws, procedures to work with many of the stakeholders that have been called out in the bill. I won't bore you with the whole list, but the essence of it is to provide a solid legislative framework for procurement, because that is a very big way that the state of California and the people of California can leverage influence in this space. We are big buyers. The state is a big buyer and our population are big buyers. And then those standards have a timeline to get established, and at some point in the bill, the state would not be able to procure those products unless they were aligned. So it's a way to get at that. So first and foremost, 892 seeks to find a way to have a thoughtful impact in this space and leveraging the state's purchasing power and doing it along these lines. I also have another bill, 893, that I think is as important, and it establishes an AI hub. Now, what the heck is that? We know that we're very proud of the fact that on the industry side, we are home to many global leaders and innovators in this space. But the truth of the matter is, in the conversation about future development, about the cutting edge of the evolution of how this takes shape and is deployed and applied around the world, it's largely a very non-democratic space, small d. It is dominated by a very small number of for-profit portfolios, big portfolios, that are driving this on the private and R&D side and application side, and good for them to a point. However, California, as we know, is home to some of the world's premier institutions of higher learning and research that need to be part of that conversation space, along with some of the leading voices in the public benefit, nonprofit, and yes, in the government space. And so SB 893 would facilitate the creation of an AI hub that would require that space be more democratized, and that those intersections are present and real, and that it isn't dominated by one particular element or consideration or motivation. And I think that's equally important, because not necessarily nefariously, but through just the nature of how the massive amounts of capital and massive amounts to handle large amounts of data at one time give automatically the default to these major international global concerns that have capacity that most other people don't. And there's very few of them, and they're dominating this conversation space, and that needs to be democratized. So that's the second bill. So procurement power and leveraging the buying power of the state and making sure that we democratize that space, and that's kind of what I'm working on at the moment.
It's pretty remarkable that once you spend enough time looking at AI, how quickly it becomes a monopoly question or conversation, that it's no longer a conversation about just the technology, but its implications and how it can concentrate power. We've got time for a few more questions, but Secretary Tong, I wanted to ask really quick, last week at the Generative AI Symposium, Governor Newsom mentioned 3 new pilot projects for the state of California, including one meant to address homelessness. Can you share any more details about these new pilot projects? I think that brings the total up to 8 for state agencies.
I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you. I really don't have much to add.
So sad.
Really, it's one of those things that the governor was in his moment and was really enthusiastic about, I mean, one of the commitment that we have, and Senator knows this, that we take a very, very measured approach, so that if there's additional pilots to be in the works, once those are ready, we want to make sure we have a chance to check with our legislative partner or community-based organization before any announcements.
Okay, well, check into CalMatters.org. Very soon, I'm told by the governor's office that they should have more to share with later this summer. If we could finish on a few last questions here, and maybe we can start with you this time, Ashkan, and we can go that direction. And of course, as I said before, if folks feel inspired to say something, please jump in. But one of the things that I was interested about, I spoke with Dr. Sophia Noble from UCLA recently. She's the author of a book, Algorithms of Oppression. She's really somebody who has been on the frontier of understanding how AI can impact communities or harm people. And she's talked about how she's concerned about industry capture in this space where monopoly is also part of the issue. Do you have any thoughts on how we can avoid industry capture going forward, or what we aren't doing now that we need to be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Noble participated in 2022 when we started to have our initial stakeholder sessions on these issues. I think, not to plug kind of both of you all, some of the other bill that Senator Padilla is doing, and there's another bill in this legislature, as well as even, CalMatters just acquired the markup, right, which is some technical expertise. I think, as I said, the core elements in this space, as I see it, are data, which we govern, compute, which we can speak about. The state doesn't really have it. It's really concentrated in a number of large entities that have the resources, and then expertise. And that third element is something that we do have in abundance in the state, but the question is how to access it. And I know Senator Padilla has a bill on that. I know there's a bill around the Interagency Personnel Act, IPA, that we used to use in the federal government. I previously worked at the chief technologist at the Federal Trade Commission. I helped set up the Office of Technology. I was one of the first technologists at that agency, and now they have a growing technology function. They also govern federally data use, privacy. They brought a case against Rite Aid around the use of AI for facial recognition and how it was biased and tagging, similar to the other stories you heard, tagging individuals incorrectly, wrongly, accusing them of shoplifting or other security issues. But the key there was, how do you get the experts in government? We've had folks approach us and say, you're not qualified to the government wholly isn't qualified to regulate AI because you don't have the experts. A senior AI engineer is $1 million per year. How can you compete with that? And I think the way you compete with that is you bring experts in academia, experts like Dr. Noble, others that have developed this expertise that can help agencies like ours, but also agencies broadly, kind of peer in and look at what is happening, demonstrate bias, demonstrate how data are used, demonstrate some of the concerns, and help develop policy and governance around these issues. I think that's a critical issue, and I would be remiss not to talk about, without solving the pipeline issue, the technology expertise issue. I don't think we have a chance here at really addressing being on level playing field to address these issues. And the Biden administration, the EO, included a direct hire authority for this. I know there's bills in the legislature to do this, and I would really love to see the governor step up and really try to fix some of these kind of structural issues about bringing experts to government.
Gerard, any thoughts on how to avoid industry capture, or are there any things that you feel like the EU learned in the process of creating the AI Act that you think Californians should know about?
Well, I think first of all we learned some lessons from social media, which was also like, don't touch it, it's the internet, I mean it's all good and brings all of these benefits for free to the citizens, don't touch it. Well, that got us into a mess, just to be very frank, and now we are in a way regulating, at least in the European Union with the Digital Service Act, Digital Markets Act, so we are kind of coming back to something probably we should have done a couple of years ago to avoid the type of situation where we are in now. And we definitely don't want to make that, we are not like donkeys that we kind of hurt ourselves twice against the same stone, as we say in the Dutch language. So we learned a lesson, and so this is also one of the reasons why we think we have now to be ahead of the curve and not behind the curve. And there is an element also about, the capture and democracy. I mean, these are fundamental questions, how we want to integrate this technology into our societies, into our economies. This is why we have democracies. We elect people like Senator Padilla to take these decisions on our behalf. Nobody elected Sam Altman, Sundar Pichai, or Mark Zuckerberg, or Elon Musk to take these decisions on our behalf. These are the decisions that we collectively as a society need to take. And that, I mean, we have fortunately in Europe not lost the art of compromise, so we can still, lawmakers still deserve the name to be called lawmakers because they make law, which is not necessarily always the case. And so we will legislate, and we will do it in a way which kind of also provide the necessary predictability. We have 27 member states, which is a bit the same when you have 50 in the US. If we do not regulate at EU level, the member states will. If we leave a void, then we get fragmentation, which from an industry perspective is even worse. I want to conclude on one point, which is we have this particular ecosystem at the moment, which is dominated by a handful of companies with very, very deep pockets. This is not the structure that the European Union sees ahead of it. We should not internalize that structure and believe it should be like this all the time. 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that was not the structure. Most of the innovations in AI came out of public research. Most of them came out of Stanford, actually. And so the ecosystem has fundamentally changed. So what we are doing in the European Union, we have a network of public supercomputers. We have 2 of the fastest supercomputers in the top 5 of the world at the moment. We have what we call data spaces, data lake, a lot of medical data, because we have a lot of data in Europe, but it's all distributed, so we need to bring it together, we need to curate it, make sure it's protected against privacy, cybersecurity, and then we let the small companies, our startups, say, now here you have at least an opportunity to compete with these big companies. And so that thinking about the ecosystem, and there's the idea about CalCompute here in the legislation, is very important, because the kind of prospect that we will be in a situation where 3-4 companies dominate this industry is not a prospect that the European Union is very satisfied about. And that's also why open source, for example, is very important. I mean, not to go into details, theme here in the whole debate.
Yeah, thank you.
I also just want to add on to what folks are saying about the industry. So we have an AI working group here in California that includes advocates from labor, from privacy, from consumer rights, and we're building that out to include more and more, hopefully, civil rights organizations that do state-based work. And one of the reasons for that is because the tech industry and industry writ large has been so effective at convincing people that the only people that have the skills and the ability to talk about this technology are people who are inside the companies who are building the technology. And we just say that that is not true. That is not true in any other realm of our economy and our society. You do not have to be a farmer to be able to understand that your food should not be covered in pesticides when it arrives to your door, right? Like, those are things that we understand. You do not need to be an expert in homomorphic encryption to understand that my data shouldn't be handed over to anyone that wants to see it. Those are fundamental rights that people understand in their bones, and we have the ability to regulate that. And I think that one of the things that it is both important that we have experts and invest in our public workforce to be able to tackle these technologies and bring them in ways that are beneficial, but we also need to be cautious about the idea that the only people that have the right to talk about this are technological experts. It's not true. All of us are impacted by this technology. All of our data is being used to power these systems and make decisions about us that we often don't know are happening, and all of us need to be in that conversation. And that is a weapon that I would love to see us break, that the tech industry uses repeatedly.
Secretary Tong?
I know we're running out of time. Very brief echo, and in fact, I was one also has been public saying that generative AI topic should not be a technology-driven topic.
Yeah.
It is a society impact conversation, and that's why the people should be at the center of it. In the conversation that we have, whether it's the hub or CalCompute or anything that was mentioned, really should be what is the impact to the individuals who's going to be at the receiving end. So that's number one. I want to echo absolutely. Even though I'm a tech background, I say this is not a tech conversation, right? It's a people conversation. Right. Number two, I would say don't chase the hypes out there. but also don't be afraid to engage. I think that the worst thing that we have is if we're feared by it or constrained by it, and we're like, oh, let's just dance around the edges. No, engage, learn, roll your sleeve up. That is the best way to develop the best policy and regulatory framework, and that is something that we're looking very much to do in the administration, but not in silo. And this is to the last point I want to say. That's why the summit last week was co-hosted by the two best academia entity, Berkeley and Stanford, and then we'll continue to engage the community-based organization as well as our legislative member. This has to be important enough that people put it as a priority and as a wholesale approach to address this particular topic.
Yeah, and community colleges were also a big part
That's
of it.
right. I should have. That's right.
Senator Padilla, would you like to have the...
Well, it's an honor to be with this panel. Echo the comments. Certainly around this needs to be an impact and social-driven, socially centered conversation. And it has to be multidisciplinary, and it has to be open and transparent. In terms of government's role to being effective, and you touched on it earlier, we need the expertise. It's a recent study I saw indicated folks that are graduating from some of our premier institutions at graduate and postgraduate levels with the requisite training and certification in the key leading skill sets that are going to be on the cutting edge of this evolution. About an overwhelming percentage when asked either intend to or go into private sector endeavors. A much smaller percentage in the NGO sector, and only about 2% think about moving in government. And we have to find ways, as was referenced earlier, to encourage that talent pool, to make it easier for those folks to come into the government space, because we need that support. All of us that seek to make thoughtful public policy need to have that support and the in-house expertise if we're going to have an effective place in this conversation on your behalf.
Thank you to our esteemed panel, Ashkan Soltani, Gerard de Graff, Samantha Cooper, Amy Tong, and Samantha Gordon. There it is. Amy Tong and Steve Padilla. Thank you so much.